Morning. This is the day that we have been given. Let us rejoice and be glad in it.
We are glad that you're here, whether watching us online or here in person. We're delighted that you made your way through the rain to this community, a place which helps you find and keep your balance, a congregation that helps you lead a life of integrity, service, and joy. Whoever you are, wherever you're from, whether you're here in person or watching us online, your gifts and your wounds are welcome here.
I'm Jess Goff, she, her. I'm joined today by my husband, Kevin Ward, and worship associate, Sara Ford. We look forward to sharing this time together with you.
This church is a vibrant community, and much of what is happening after today's service and in the weeks ahead can be found in your This Week at Unity. After today's service, join us in the parish hall for tea, coffee, and conversation.
We pause now to center ourselves as our tower bell calls us to deeper attention and intention.
Good morning. Before I play the prelude, just a quick few words. Jess and Kevin, when they were planning the service, all they said was, "We'd like you to bring some music that brings you joy." So that was the prompt. Play music that brings you joy. So the two hymns that I chose for today are associated with two moments that have brought me a lot of joy here at this church. And the two pieces listed on the program are, well, that's a really hard prompt for a musician, but this composer is an obscure composer from Spain that I am known for uplifting and performing his music, and these two pieces are some of my favorites by him. And I'll try to sneak in some other music in the service related to things that bring me joy. So thank you, Jess and Kevin.
Come in from the wind by Heather Ryan Starr. I picked the wrong poem. On this day, as with so many Sundays, we come in from the whirling world, the wind, the bright sun, the push and pull of tides and time, from the tumult of global news and local stories, the pain we hear of, the demands on our spirits, the do this now culture that we live in. We come into this sanctuary from that windstorm, the rush of speeding drivers on the roadways, the rustling silence that filled some of our homes, the vastness of a once busy and perhaps now quieter house. All of this can leave us feeling stirred and unsettled. When we give our attention to what's going on around and beyond us in this throbbing world, we can feel windblown. We need places where we can come and find our grounding once again. Come in from the wind, come in from the whirl. May this be a place where we can experience genuine stillness, even just for a few moments. May this be a place where we can count on as we arrive here together or turn on our computers and come seeking Unity's homepage. May we feel pulled into a restorative time of energetic peace. May this be a place of learning and nourishment, a community that generates new zest in us for the dynamic beauty of this world. Come, let us worship together. Please join with me in the words found in your order of service. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith, the light of truth, and the warmth of love. My wife and I attend a 12-step program, a group that meets, and everyone in that group has the same thing in common, which is someone we dearly love struggles with addiction. In our 12-step group, we begin with a check-in, wherein each person introduces themselves and gives a number from 1 to 10 to indicate how we're doing that day. 1 is bad and 10 is great. In this group, a difference of opinion has surfaced related to the numbers we share during check-in. It's not a difference of opinion about how anyone's doing on any given day. It's a difference of opinion about how we feel we should or what we can afford to aim for. It's common for those who are new to the group, usually very near the worst moment of their lives, to say they're a 0.5 or a 2 or a 1.7. And it's common for those who've been coming for decades to announce they're an 8 or 9, and sometimes, astonishingly, a 10. But some say I'm a 5, and that's as high as you're ever going to find me. I'm a 5, and you won't find me looking any higher than a 5. It's not just they're having a 5 of a day. It's that 5 is the highest goal they feel they can afford. For them, the thought of having a day as good as an 8 or a 10 is terribly frightening, far too risky. If I let myself have a day that good, they explain, then when relapse and overdose come, I'll not be able to bear the fall. It'll kill me. And so for some, 5 is the safest goal. Others in our group, chagrined by this, will say, what about hope? How do we find joy when the world is so very full of suffering? How do we find joy at the very moment we are confronting our powerlessness? There are enough people checking in the 7 to 10 range on the regular to know that is possible. And these people are not shallow, not dismissing their suffering or that of their loved ones, but how do they get there? The Reverend Desmond Tutu reminds us, you can overcome the most horrendous circumstances and emerge on the other side, not broken. Despair can come from deep grief, he says, but it can also be a defense against the risks of bitter disappointment and shattering heartbreak. Resignation and cynicism, he continues, are easier, more self-soothing postures that do not require the raw vulnerability of tragic risk and hope. To choose hope is to firmly move forward into the howling wind, bearing one's chest to the elements, knowing that in time the storm will pass.
Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. We take a moment to settle ourselves, to pause, to breathe, to enter a time of meditation, reflection, or prayer, as is your practice.
Our human condition includes the truth that on any given Sunday, there may be one among us facing cancer, another is mourning the loss of a beloved. There may be one among us who is struggling with mental health, and another is trying to embody and embrace the spiritual practice of raising children.
Someone among us is worried about making ends meet. and another is concerned about a loved one in prison. There may be one among us who has wounded others by addiction, and one who is celebrating another decade of recovery. There may be one among us who is facing their final days. We support them in this time of transition that requires curiosity, courage, and honesty.
We hold in care all these and more as we pray for the peoples of this courageous congregation, and as together we live into our longing to embody and help build beloved community. We hold in our hearts Vicki Stewart and her family as they grieve the death of Vicki's father, Kinsey's grandfather, Maury Stewart, who died on June 30th at the age of 90.
We invite you now to speak aloud the names of those who are on your mind and heart this day.
I offer a prayer this morning, excerpted from the Way of the Bodhisattva. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be free. May the powerless find power, and the people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world.
Can you explain the role that humility plays in cultivating joy? I asked. They tell the story of a bishop, he began, who was about to ordain candidates to the priesthood. They were speaking about virtues, including the virtue of humility. One of the candidates came to the bishop and said, "My lord, I've been looking in the library to find a book on humility." The bishop said, "Oh yes, I've written the best book on the subject." Thanks for laughing. In 2015, the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, a spiritual leader who helped end apartheid in South Africa, met with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, exiled from his Tibetan home and living in Dharamsala, India, to discuss joy. What is it? How do we find it? How do we keep it? How do we share it? Though this joke about humility comes from deep in the book, it seems the right place to start. As we begin our journey today on the road to joy, it is wise to do so with humility. And of course, I think you know, except maybe for Sara Ford and Jess Goff, I am the most awesome person in this congregation to share with you how we can travel this road together. And so our first stop on the road to joy, my first encounter with the Dalai Lama, is, as many of you probably will know, the 1980 film Caddyshack. So I jump ship in Hong Kong and make my way over to Tibet, and I get on as a looper on a course in the Himalayas. A looper? A looper, you know, a caddy. A looper, a jock. So I tell them I'm a pro jock, and who do you think they give me? The Dalai Lama himself, the 12th son of the Lama, with flowing robes, grace, bald, striking. I'm on the first tee with him. I give him the driver. He hauls off and whacks one. Big hitter, the Lama, long, into a 10,000-foot crevice at the base of this glacier. Do you know what the Lama says? Gunga galunga, gunga gunga de gunga. So we finish, and he's going to stiff me. And I say, "Hey, Lama, how about a little something, you know, for the effort?" He says, there won't be any money, but when you die on your deathbed, you will receive total consciousness. So I got that going for me, which is nice. As is true for the Dalai Lama, mischievous, full of laughter, this scene from Caddyshack shows us how silliness gives way to a deeper understanding of joy. Joy is not about a cash payment. It's not about anything external. Instead, it is about what the Dalai Lama refers to as pure luminosity, one that we might have any old time, but one also that the Dalai Lama meditates on as part of his death meditation. Each day, he does the death and rebirth meditations 5 times. He meditates on his death, goes away, and then he meditates on rebirth, comes back. Total consciousness. I admit, to me, the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop Tutu seem like 2 very remote figures when Jess recommended this book to me. In fact, she did not simply recommend it. She testified about how powerfully it made her rethink her own life, which caused me to worry a little. But that itself was its highest recommendation. My favorite book is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. And in it, the main character, Elizabeth Bennet, comes to understand that her initial prejudice towards Mr. Darcy and his character was incorrect. "Till this moment, I never knew myself," says Elizabeth. Austen originally entitled the book First Impressions, because she wanted to explore how wrong they can be. When characters in literature and life suddenly understand something they did not know before, James Joyce called it an epiphany, that is a thrilling moment for me. So I took Jess's transformation as persuasion enough to read the Book of Joy. At first, my first impression was that I was underwhelmed. This often happens to me when my expectations are high. Most of what the first part of the book contains, well, felt like stuff anybody would know. It felt like a Hallmark card, obvious. But then something happened that surprised me. I found myself crying. Now, it's true that I cry often, and this does not endear me to people, mind you. In fact, my daughter still cannot believe that I cried while watching The Rock and Emily Blunt in that masterpiece from Disney, The Jungle Cruise. However, when I came to understand as I read the book, or what I came to understand as I read the book, was that the Archbishop Desmond Tutu and His Holiness the Dalai Lama had been through so much in their lives. For the Archbishop, the loss of many friends and loved ones in the struggle to end apartheid in South Africa. For the Dalai Lama, decades of exile from his home in Tibet and the constant struggle between the Tibetans and the Chinese government. Life, in a manner of speaking, had burned away at least some of the complexity. Their lives had been focused by the struggles they faced and their truths distilled. I know my life experience does not compare with the magnitude of what they faced, but it is helpful to me in understanding why joy could be attainable. When Jess and I had our first child, Murray, he was with us only 1 week before we found out that he had a rare genetic disease called cystic fibrosis. Stupidly, idiotically, I went to the highly reliable and helpful internet to learn more. Mostly what I saw was death. Granted, I was probably too much in shock to actually look at the details, and I closed my computer, terrified, scared. I thought our son would suffer and die soon, and that seemed to me the worst thing ever. However, something amazing happened. Learning this terrible news somehow burned away some of my anxiety and insecurity I feel on a daily basis. None of that was going to help Murray or Jess. After some gnashing of teeth and rending of garments, I came to see what was happening as a great focuser. Suddenly, Hallmark cards seemed deep and profound. Yes, each day is a gift. Yes, I am glad to have a friend like you. Wishing you the best day ever. Hope your day is as sweet as you are. Till this moment, I never knew myself. In great fear, I discovered joy. Not in Murray, though he is cute, and not in Jess, though she is awesome. Not in anyone else, just myself. I know it took a whole bunch of reframing, as the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu talk about in the book, just like it took Elizabeth Bennet rejecting Mr. Darcy and yet him helping her family in crisis. And well, okay, if you haven't read Pride and Prejudice, you really should go out and get a copy and read the book, okay, because it's awesome. I was very moved a few weeks ago by Reverend Laura's story. She also did a service on joy, on the Ode to Joy. And one story that she told was of two guys in a hospital room. And one's flat on his back, and the other one, who's by the window, is describing things. The guy at the window eventually dies, and the other guy has to be moved to his bed because that guy had been describing all these amazing things out his window. Once he's moved over, he looks out the window and sees that it's a brick wall. This is to remind us that we can conjure what we need from any situation to offer hope to ourselves and others. Nevertheless, I think joy is more about seeing the wall for what it is, to accept the wall, the way the Dalai Lama accepted exile, the way the Archbishop accepted the reality of apartheid. Sometimes people think joy is about accentuating the positive, eliminating the negative, and not messing around with Mr. In-Between. Jess and Murray and Olive and so many others have shown me that joy means facing what is there, but not being defined or limited by it. It feels weird to limit the lives of these great spiritual leaders to events and realities that only briefly address their lives and their impact. The road to joy is an internal one that leads to an inspired external reality. In other words, our joy becomes infectious. On page 64 in this book, I did do the reading, okay? The Dalai Lama says, I think if you're an intensely religious believer, as soon as you wake up, you thank God for another day, and you try to do God's will. For a non-theist like myself, but who is a Buddhist, as soon as I wake up, I remember Buddha's teaching, the importance of kindness and compassion, wishing something good for others, or at least to reduce their suffering. Then I remember that everything is interrelated, the teaching of interdependence. So, I set my intention for the day that this day should be meaningful. Meaningful means, if possible, serve and help others. If not possible, then at least not to harm others. That's a meaningful day. The Dalai Lama sets his intention for the day to help and serve, or at least to do no harm. Part of that work is stuff that I'm not sure I can do. Achieve mental immunity. That's what the Dalai Lama calls it. Mental immunity. Though the Archbishop would like us to be kinder to ourselves when we screw up, we make mistakes, we get angry. To remember we are imperfect beings and to love all of whatever it is that we are. The Dalai Lama says we can do better. So, I imagine the Dalai Lama as Coach Lama. He's got a ball cap on, he's wearing a whistle, he's got a sweatshirt that says Coach on it. I imagine right now that he's wearing pants, but I've never really thought about that. So actually robes would probably make more sense. But anyway, Coach Lama blows his whistle. When I think my students are not going to graduate, my brother doesn't want to see me, the world is falling apart, the neighbor's dog won't shut up. He says to me, Kevin, you need to practice positive thinking. You need to look for the positive things in other people and situations. Jess reminds me that my thinking is making me anxious, and it is serving as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Sure, bad things will happen, but I keep myself from joy when I nudge my world towards bad stuff, like when I'm a jerk. On the road to joy, it is super duper important to work on training our mind not to see differently, but to think differently about what we see. As Hamlet says to Horatio, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. That's why I bristle when people say we live in a broken world. The world is what you make of it. Terrible things happen. Terrible things happen beyond our control. Terrible things happened last week, today, tomorrow. However, much of human suffering, says both the Archbishop and the Dalai Lama, is of our own making. So why not let the opposite be true? Much of our joy is because we make it. This is a story that the Dalai Lama tells. This reminds me of my friend who told me about being sent to a Chinese gulag at the time I escaped from Tibet. The night I fled from the palace at Norbalinka, I went to a chapel to pay my respects, knowing it was likely the last time I would ever see it again. My friend, who was already a senior monk at Namgyal monastery, was there at the chapel. Lopon La, as he is affectionately known by his fellow monks, did not know it was me because my visit was top secret and I could not tell him. Then as soon as I left the palace, the Chinese bombardment started. They arrested many people, and about 130 were sent to a very remote area, like during Stalin's rule when people were sent to Siberia. After 18 years of hard labor, Lopon La was able to come to India, and he told me what happened during his time in the work camp. They had no shoes, even during the very coldest of days. Sometimes it was so cold that when you spit, it would land as ice. They were always hungry. One day he was so hungry that he tried to eat the body of one of the other prisoners that had died, but the flesh of the dead person was frozen and too hard to bite. Throughout the whole time, they tortured the prisoners. There's the Soviet-style torture and the Japanese-style torture and the Chinese-style torture. And at this camp, they combined them all into an immensely cruel kind of torture. When he left the camp, only 20 people had survived. He told me that during those 18 years, he faced some real dangers. I thought, of course. He was talking about dangers to his own life. He told me he was in danger of losing his compassion for his Chinese guards. This story speaks to me because the true danger on the road to joy is that we will somehow separate ourselves from each other, that we will let go of the ultimate humility, which is that we are all ordinary human beings on this pilgrimage together. There are many people who have hurt me. There are many people that I have hurt, but we're still together. We still walk side by side. This suffering and our journey to reframe our responses both lead us to true joy. And as our beloved Rob Eller Isaacs used to say, I forgive you, I forgive me. Let us begin again in love. Jane Austen's Elizabeth Bennet discovers who she is. Carl, Bill Murray's character in Caddyshack, awaits total consciousness. And we come out the other side of suffering and learn to love the Hallmark card. Wishing you the best day ever. May it be so, and amen.
So, as you already know, the Book of Joy is based on a week of conversations between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop, Desmond Tutu. The writer, Douglas Abrams, interviews them and weaves their words into a narrative along with other research about the topic of joy. Before I talk about how much I appreciate the Book of Joy and how it's helped me in the past several years, let me lay some groundwork. Here's where I start. The world is a mess, life is hard, and people are difficult. I mean, that can't possibly be what I really believe, and you and I know that isn't true, but doesn't it feel that way sometimes? The world feels impossible. I'm a Montessori teacher, and I have been for just over a decade. Part of Montessori teacher training is about becoming a prepared adult, about transforming oneself and one's approach to be ready to work with children. This work has been incredibly satisfying to me, and I believe it was and is transformative. Approaching all children with the utmost respect and awareness of their dignity, supporting them in their growth, and getting out of their way, all those things took practice. At school, we talk about foundational beliefs. All children are good. They are all doing their best. This is something that takes work to remember in the heat of a moment. When a child hits another, throws precious materials, or swears at me. But I can now more consistently believe, even in a time of escalation, if this child could do better, they would. I can more consistently meet them with grace and space. Approaching children and learning like this was transformative to me. But adults? What about the world beyond children? In my experience, while they're not regularly throwing things at me, I do sometimes struggle to give grace and space to others. If not in my actions, certainly in my head. As for adults I don't know personally, adults I hear about, or whose actions affect me through politics, for example, well, holding constant compassion and respect for the dignity of each human being is hard. When a parent yells at me on the phone when I call, when I overhear people in a store talking dismissively about those dirty people with signs on the corner, when yet another anti-trans bill passes, when a public figure advocates mass deportation and hundreds of people cheer, I struggle with these foundational beliefs as applied to adults. Is everyone really good? Is everyone really doing their best? Really? Really? This is our best? If I genuinely want to be a good person, to make the world a better place, how can that even work if I can't believe that? One of the many aspects of the Book of Joy that resonated with me was that the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop start there too. I mean, obviously, they have great faith in humanity, but the book starts with discussions exploring the obstacles to joy. Sometimes in this part, it felt like they were listening to my inner thoughts and replying over and over, "It makes sense that humans act this way." These thoughtful leaders lay out with great clarity how many emotions are protective and that protection is behind so many negative attitudes and actions. At one point, the Archbishop says, we all have fears. Fear and anxiety are mechanisms that have helped us survive. I actually thought about that specific part of the book when my family was watching Inside Out 2 this summer. I love both the Inside Out 2 movies because they make emotions concrete for children. They give language and image to inner voice, to stress, to mental conflict. I'm not spoiling anything the preview didn't already show you when I say that anxiety is a big new character in Inside Out 2, which deals with Riley, the main character, moving into puberty. This movie resonated with me as a teacher, as a parent of 2 adolescents, and as a human. In the movie, the character of anxiety is trying to protect Riley, even as she seemingly sabotages Riley's better judgment and best interests. Taming anxiety means we have to accept first. It makes sense to feel that way. Our son's critique of the movie was that it was good, but a little oversimplified. Learning happened too fast. At 16, he understands that in real life, this learning is more complex and takes more time. He already sees that literally everyone sometimes struggles with protective instincts, and accepting them and using them to move forward is lifelong work. As I was reading the Book of Joy, I also thought about how the simplification of ideas makes sense. This, too, is a protective act. I generally dislike plaques with sayings, like the oft-mocked, live, laugh, love. The kinds of sappy home decor sold and shared in our social media-driven world to symbolize inspiration. The members of my book club and I once rented a vacation house with no fewer than 17 of these signs hanging on every wall of its 5 rooms, including the bathroom. Reminders around every corner. Cherish each moment. Believe in yourself. Live life to its fullest. Don't forget to relax. Bring your own sunshine. Well, this situation led us to loud mockery. Stop telling me what to do. I can see how simple reminders like these could be meaningful to people and why these signs are popular. I can even see how some people can find Hallmark cards touching. I think we are also seeing dangerous simplification leading to isolation in our public life. American rugged individualism has always been only myth, but it is an attractive one because it's also protective. I think it's why self-care, a vitally important practice, can sometimes turn into a blaming admonition. You aren't doing well? Maybe you need to take better care of yourself. Drink more water. Make a budget. You are the cause of your own suffering. The quotation that Sara shared in her reflection about cynicism and resignation speaks to this too. All these approaches are easier, more self-soothing, limiting, protective. We live in a society where we are not encouraged to take care of each other. The Dalai Lama addresses anger as one of those protective emotions too. Underlying this anger, he says, is a fear that we will not get what we need, that we are not loved, that we are not respected, that we will not be included. So, having thought about obstacles, what do we do? How do we get to joy? According to the Book of Joy, there are 8 pillars of joy: perspective, humility, humor, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. This seems like a very big assignment. I can't talk about them all today, but I'll share some insights that most resonated with me. First, the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop start with the idea that joy as a way of being is not simply happiness or fun, but it is, in fact, a deep sense of connection and compassion. Being a good person, being grounded in joy, isn't about simple enjoyment. It's about many different emotions, thought patterns, and complex satisfaction. At one point in the book, Douglas Abrams explores the idea that people have a set point that determines happiness. He cites an older study showing that lottery winners are not significantly more happy than people who have been paralyzed in an accident. The conclusion was that circumstances aren't the determining factor. There's some sort of inherent set point of happiness that each person returns to regardless of circumstances. He then cites more recent research that shows that while immutable factors, temperament, genetics, etc., play a role, there is much each person can do to control their happiness. This newer study found that circumstances, attitudes, and actions play a big part in determining happiness. Although there is much about our circumstances we can't control, attitudes and actions are very much in our control. It makes sense, then, that attitudes and actions are what the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop address as they tackle the complexities of joy. In addition to differentiating happiness and joy, the book also explores the idea that acceptance is the opposite of resignation and defeat. The Archbishop says we cannot succeed by denying what exists. The acceptance of reality is the only place from which change can begin. Later, Abrams writes, so many of the causes of suffering come from our reacting to the people, places, things, and circumstances in our lives rather than just accepting them. When we react, we stay locked in judgment and criticism, anxiety and despair, even denial and addiction. It is impossible to experience joy when we are stuck this way. Acceptance is the sword that cuts through all of this resistance, allowing us to relax, to see clearly, and to respond appropriately. This type of acceptance, which is not resignation, allows us to be available to address the suffering of the world. It allows us to hold not just two opposite truths, but to hold it all. At our best, to hold the whole spectrum of truths that make up our complex selves and our complex world. I can notice and accept that I am angry and frustrated when a colleague dismisses my work with a, "Well, I know you think that's important, but I don't allow that in my classroom." When I stop sputtering with irritation telling the story to someone else, I can reframe to imagine my colleague is worried about their own work and choices, and that their comment is more about them trying to feel good about their own work. I can try to make sure my classroom reflects what I believe and that my colleague feels supported in theirs. Kevin and I, in our frequent conversations about how to reframe everyday frustrations like these, often imagine the Archbishop reminding us to be gentle with ourselves and Coach Lama reminding us we can continue to do better. What about the times when pain is so great that we despair? At one point, near the end of the book, they address the question of how to find joy when we feel world sick and heart sick. Generosity as spirit is a phrase I first heard here in this church, and a concept to which the Book of Joy is leading. It is the way of being that allows us to take in the suffering of others and give them back our joy. Our generosity does not diminish us, but gives us greater capacity for more. Desmond Tutu says, "I've sometimes joked and said God doesn't know very much math, because when you give to others, it should be that you are subtracting from yourself. But in this incredible kind of way, you gave, and it's like, in fact, you are making more space for more to be given to you." We can accept where we are and continue to work for justice with joy, not just in our personal lives, but in our collective lives. Rather than remain heartsick and world sick, the Archbishop says, do what you can. Remember, you are not alone, and you do not need to finish the work. It takes time, but we are learning, we are growing, we are becoming the people we want to be. People are good. Everyone is doing their best. Joy is not only possible, but necessary. May it be so. Amen.
Unity Church is framed by statements of conscience known as our end statements. One of those is generously give and openly receive compassionate care in times of joy and sorrow and transition. Our compassionate care extends beyond the walls of this church to communities with whom we share common interest. Each week, the larger portion of our offering goes to our community partners, and this week, the recipient is Prepare and Prosper. Prepare and Prosper works to build financial health by providing access to quality tax and financial services, products, and options that build wealth instead of stripping it away. Prepare and Prosper works with people, communities, and systems to break down barriers and develop solutions to promote financial success while advocating to advance state and local policies and practices that directly affect low to moderate income families. Will the ushers please come forward? May the work of our hands and the generosity of our hearts be given in gratitude this day.
All right, this is the last part. Before we close with the poem, just wanted to say thank you to Ahmed. That's lovely music, yeah? Okay. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tunes without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. As Emily Dickinson knew, hope is within us. To find the joy that hope contains, we cannot look for it. We already have it. So we got that going for us, which is nice. If you can read with us in unison. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Amen.